In the dead of a Minnesota winter, one cabin stood alone at the edge of the road, a place built for silence, a man who believed distance was the only way to survive. Then, on a night when the cold showed no mercy, a knock came, not from danger, but from desperation. A mother with nowhere left to run, 3 children carrying more fear than they should ever know, and one decision that would change every life inside that cabin forever. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Ash River, Minnesota did not ease into winter. It surrendered to it. Snow arrived early and stayed late, pressing the town into long months of muted color and shortened days. The roads narrowed beneath packed ice, and the wind slid down from the forest with a dry persistence that worked its way through seams, hinges, and bone. In Ash River, cold was not dramatic. It was practical. It punished mistakes and ignored excuses. A mile beyond the last occupied house, a narrow road curved toward the trees and ended at a single cabin set back from the lake. The building was old but sound, its roof bowed under the weight of snow, its porch half buried where drifts gathered faster than anyone could clear them. One porch light burned steadily against the dark. It did not shine far, but it was constant. Daniel Hargrove lived there alone. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, with a frame that suggested strength retained out of discipline rather than vanity. His hair was cut short, dark with gray beginning to thread through at the sides. A light stubble traced his jaw, sharpening features already made angular by restraint. His eyes were pale and alert, the kind that measured a room before committing to it. Years in uniform had taught him how to stay still without being passive. Daniel did not consider himself unfriendly. He simply avoided what complicated things. He spoke when necessary, worked with care, and kept his life narrow enough that nothing unexpected could demand more than he was willing to give. The habits were not accidental. He had learned early what anger could do inside a house, and later what consequences followed hesitation in the field. By the time he left the military, he understood one truth clearly. Distance was safer than attachment. The cabin reflected that understanding. Tools were hung neatly along one wall. Firewood was stacked close to the stove. There were no photographs, no personal objects that suggested permanence beyond function. Everything had a place, and everything could be left behind if it had to be. That evening, the temperature dropped sharply after sunset. Snow fell in a steady, angled sheet, driven sideways by a tightening wind. Daniel completed his routine without rush. He checked the generator, tested the stove draft, and secured the back door. When he turned off the interior lights, he left the porch light on. He told himself it was practical. Visibility mattered if the power failed. Still, he had never turned it off completely. Not since the first winter. The explanation he offered himself was always the same. The truth was quieter. In Ash River, a light meant someone was still there. The sound came just as he settled into his chair. It was faint, nearly lost beneath the wind, a scrape against wood, followed by a soft, irregular thud. Daniel froze, body responding before thought. He listened. The stove ticked as metal cooled. The wind pressed against the walls. Silence returned. Then the sound came again, closer this time. Daniel rose and crossed the room slowly. He did not reach for a weapon. He had learned to recognize panic, and this did not sound like threat. He wiped frost from the small window beside the door and leaned in. The porch light revealed 4 figures standing inside its narrow circle. A woman stood at the center, her posture tight with fatigue. She held a small bundle against her chest, an infant wrapped in a thin blanket, only a flushed cheek and knit cap visible. Her other hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a little girl who leaned into her side. In front of them stood a boy, older than the girl, his shoulders squared as if he believed his body could block the wind. Daniel opened the door a few inches. Cold air surged inside. None of them moved forward. Up close, the woman looked to be in her early 30s. She was slender, her face drawn and pale beneath windburn. Light chestnut hair had slipped loose from a hurried tie and clung damply to her forehead. Her parka was worn thin at the elbows, its color faded from use. One glove was black, the other gray, both frayed. A bruise darkened the edge of her jaw where her scarf failed to hide it. Despite that, she kept her chin lifted, her eyes steady. The boy spoke first. "Sir," he said, his voice was tight but controlled, "my mom needs somewhere warm, just for a minute." He was about 12, tall for his age, blonde hair flattened beneath a damp hat. His eyes were blue and focused, scanning Daniel's face for risk. His jaw trembled slightly, not with tears but with effort. Daniel recognized the posture. The boy had decided it was his job to protect the others. The little girl, no more than 5, did not speak. She clutched the woman's coat with both hands and stared at the threshold as if measuring whether crossing it would make things worse. Snow dusted her hair and boots. She was very still. The infant made a brief, thin sound and then fell quiet again. The woman adjusted her hold automatically, rocking once, twice. The movement was practiced, born of long nights and limited rest. Daniel felt the pull of two instincts colliding. One urged caution. People brought problems. Problems demanded decisions. Decisions carried consequences he had spent years avoiding. The other instinct was older and harder to ignore. It remembered what it was like to watch a door close. He looked past them into the darkness. The storm showed no sign of easing. With a baby in that wind, there was no margin. The woman spoke, her voice low and controlled. "I'm sorry," she said. "We're not looking for trouble. We don't have anywhere to go tonight." She did not plead. She stated a fact. Daniel opened the door, wider. Heat spilled out and snow followed it in. He stepped back and held the door, leaving space. He did not touch her. He did not reach for the child. He made room. The boy moved first, guiding the little girl inside with a gentle hand at her back. The woman followed, careful with her footing, the baby held close. As they crossed the threshold, the warmth reached them all at once. The little girl exhaled shakily and turned her face toward the stove. The boy's eyes swept the room, still alert. Daniel closed the door most of the way and latched it without locking it. He had no plan beyond this moment. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair and the couch near the stove. His voice was even. "By the heat." The woman nodded and sat carefully, lowering herself without loosening her hold on the baby. The infant's cheeks were flushed, skin cool to the touch. Daniel's chest tightened briefly, then settled. He turned away and retrieved a thick wool blanket from the cabinet, the one he kept for emergencies, and placed it within her reach. The boy watched his hands the entire time. Daniel met his gaze briefly, not as a challenge but as acknowledgement, then looked away. The message was simple. You can rest for a minute. Outside, the storm continued its work, scraping the world raw. Inside, the cabin held 4 strangers who breathed in the same small space. Daniel stood near the stove, listening to sounds he had not heard here before, the faint rustle of fabric, the soft breathing of children learning whether they were safe. He had chosen this life so that nothing would knock on his door. Winter, it seemed, had other plans. The warmth didn't fix anything. It only revealed what the cold had been hiding. As the cabin air settled around them, the woman's shoulders loosened by a fraction, not because she trusted the place, but because her body could no longer afford to stay rigid. The baby on her chest made a soft, damp sound, half breath, half whimper, then pressed its face into the blanket as if trying to disappear into it. The little girl hovered near the stove, palms held out toward the heat without touching anything, cautious the way children became when they learned that comfort could be temporary. The boy remained standing, positioned between the others in the door, boots planted wide, eyes moving constantly. Daniel Hargrove watched all of it from a few steps back. He had opened the door. That was the only decision he had made. Everything that came after felt like a chain he hadn't agreed to carry. "Just for tonight," he said, voice even, not unkind. He wasn't speaking to the children. He aimed the words at the woman because she was the one who would understand their weight. "Roads are bad. You can warm up, sleep. When it's light, you go." The woman nodded once, as if she had expected nothing more. Up close, the bruising along her jaw looked newer than Daniel wanted it to be. The skin there had the dull, bruised bloom of a handprint that had been covered too late. Her eyes were a tired hazel, steady but guarded. She didn't thank him with the kind of voice people used when they tried to repay you instantly. She simply accepted the rule. Okay, she said, one night. Her name, when she finally offered it, was Emily Carter. The sound of it in the cabin felt strange, an identity placed on the table like a fragile object. She was slender, mid-30s at most, with light chestnut hair pulled back in a rough tie. There was an exhaustion in her posture that went past sleep deprivation. It was the exhaustion of someone who had been balancing fear for too long. She held the infant as if the child were both shield and responsibility, her arm locked around its back. The boy's name came next, clipped and efficient. Ethan, he said, before Daniel could ask. 12, tall for his age, blonde hair flattened from the hat he still wore. His face had the sharp, hungry lines of adolescence arriving early. He didn't look like a child who was used to being protected. His attention kept snapping to the corners of the room, to the windows, to Daniel's hands. He wasn't rude. He was vigilant. The little girl was Lily, 5. Dark hair, blunt cut that had grown uneven, cheeks reddened by wind, lashes clumped with melted snow. She did not introduce herself. Emily did it for her. Lily's grip on her mother's coat did not loosen, even as she edged closer to the stove. Her eyes stayed wide and observant, collecting details the way children did when they didn't feel safe enough to play. The baby did not have to speak to announce its state. Its breathing was quick and shallow. The small body in Emily's arms shivered intermittently, as if it had never fully stopped being cold. Daniel watched the baby's lips, slightly blue at the edges, and felt irritation rise, not at them, but at the helplessness the scene demanded. "How old?" he asked. Emily glanced down, adjusting the blanket around the infant's head. 14 months, she said. Her voice softened when she spoke about the baby, then tightened again. "His name is Miles." Miles. The child's eyes were open just enough to show a watery gray-blue, unfocused but present. He made another sound and tucked his face into Emily's jacket. Daniel turned toward the stove. He added 2 pieces of dry pine, adjusted the intake, then stepped into the kitchen corner where he kept the basics: mugs, soup cans, oatmeal, a jar of honey that never seemed to go down. He set a kettle on the stove's edge to warm. He did not ask if they wanted anything. He acted the way he knew how, by doing. Ethan watched him prepare food with the same intensity he had watched him open the door. When Daniel opened a cupboard, the boy's shoulders tightened. When Daniel set a can on the counter, the boy's weight shifted forward, ready. Daniel noticed and said nothing. He understood what that posture meant. The child had seen adults change moods fast. The child had learned to anticipate. "Sit," Daniel said again, calmer, lower, and pointed to the table this time. "All of you. If you're going to be here, you're going to eat." Lily climbed onto the chair, as if it might vanish. Ethan stayed standing until Emily sat first. Then he took the chair nearest the door. Emily kept Miles in her lap, one arm braced around him. Daniel heated soup, stirred it slowly, and split it into 2 bowls for the kids first. He tore bread with his hands rather than using a knife, not because he couldn't, but because the movement looked less sharp, less threatening. Then he placed a 3rd bowl in front of Emily. She hesitated, eyes flicking up. "I can't," she began. "You can," Daniel said simply. He set a mug of warm water beside her. "Small sips for him," he added, nodding at Miles. "Don't give him too much at once." Emily studied Daniel for a second, surprised not by the instruction, but by the fact that he knew it. Then she nodded, and the gratitude in her face looked like pain held back. They ate in near silence. Lily took small bites, chewing slowly, gaze fixed on the stove flame as if it were a story unfolding. Ethan ate faster, practical, then paused halfway through to watch his mother. When Emily lifted the spoon to her mouth, her hand shook once, barely. She steadied it by pressing her elbow into her knee. Daniel pretended not to notice. Afterward, Daniel cleared the bowls and rinsed them, the cabin filled with the quiet clink of ceramic and water. It was an ordinary sound, but in this context, it felt almost intimate. He kept his movements measured, giving them no reason to read danger into him. When he turned back, Emily had shifted to cradle Miles against her shoulder, rocking slowly. Lily had slid off the chair and sat on the floor near the stove, knees tucked under her, watching the fire. Ethan remained at the table, shoulders forward, hands clasped, eyes scanning. Daniel crossed to the closet and pulled out bedding, an old sleeping bag, a thick wool blanket, a spare pillow. He laid them on the couch for Emily and the baby, then placed the sleeping bag on the floor near the stove for the children. "No one sleeps outside," he said. It sounded like a rule. It was also a decision. Emily's throat moved. "Thank you," she said quietly this time. The word did not come with expectation. It came with exhaustion. Ethan didn't thank him. He watched. Daniel respected him for it. Daniel walked to the window and checked the road, though he already knew what he would see. The storm thickening, the world reduced to a narrow cone of light and drifting snow. He also checked for tracks, headlights, anything that suggested another presence. There was nothing, only wind and white. Still, he did not lock the door. He latched it. He left the porch light burning. When the room settled again, Emily spoke, voice low so the children would not fully hear. "He's looking for us," she said. Not a question, a fact. Daniel didn't turn from the window. "Who?" "My husband," Emily replied. The word sounded like something she wished she could spit out. He threw us out, tonight. He said if I came back, it would be worse." Daniel's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes on the dark beyond the glass. "Did he hit you?" Silence stretched. Emily's hand moved unconsciously to the bruise along her jaw. "Yes," she said, almost soundless. "Not the first time." Daniel exhaled through his nose, controlled. Anger in him was an old animal. He had learned to keep it leashed. "Why here?" he asked. "Why this road?" Emily gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Because it was the only direction I could walk without him seeing the highway lights," she said. "And I remembered there was a cabin with a porch light. Someone at the diner mentioned it once, said you kept it on." Daniel felt something cold settle behind his ribs, not fear, but consequence. His small, practical habit had become a beacon. He had never asked for that. Yet here it was. Across the room, Lily shifted closer to Emily, curling against her leg. Ethan's head lifted slightly, hearing enough to understand danger without details. Daniel turned away from the window. He looked at the children. The baby's eyelids fluttered, heavy. Emily's face was set with a kind of quiet determination, the kind that appeared when running was no longer an option, and pride was the only thing left intact. "One night," Daniel said again, but this time it sounded less like a limit and more like an anchor he was clinging to. "We'll get through the night. In the morning we'll figure out roads, phones, options." Emily nodded. "That's all I'm asking." Daniel moved to the corner where his phone sat on the counter. There was service sometimes if the wind didn't swallow it. He didn't pick it up yet. He only looked at it, aware that reaching for help would change the shape of this situation. He had built his life around not needing anyone, but he had also opened his door. He dimmed the lamp, leaving the stove fire to provide most of the light. The cabin softened into shadows. Emily lay on the couch with Miles curled against her chest. Lily crawled into the sleeping bag and clutched the edge tight. Ethan lay down last, still in his jacket, eyes open, facing the door. Daniel sat in his chair by the window, boots on, hands resting on his knees. He did not sleep. Outside, the storm continued to erase the world. Inside, the porch light burned steadily, a small, unwavering point against the cold. He had called it practicality. Tonight it was something else entirely. And somewhere in the dark beyond Ash River Road, Daniel understood consequences were already moving. Morning did not arrive gently. It came pale and hard, pressing against the cabin windows with a light that made every edge sharper. The storm had passed some time before dawn, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt artificial, as if the world had been paused mid-breath. Snow lay thick and unbroken across the clearing, sculpted into shallow ridges by the night wind. The temperature had dropped further. Cold now sat heavy, settled, confident. Daniel Hargrove rose from his chair without sound. He had slept in fragments, minutes at a time, never fully surrendering to rest. His body carried the old habit of alertness, the kind that kept one eye open even when exhaustion insisted otherwise. He pulled on his jacket and boots, movements slow and deliberate, and crossed to the window. The first thing he looked for was the road. It was still there, but barely. Snow had swallowed most of it, smoothing the tire ruts into a pale, continuous line that vanished into the trees. No headlights, no fresh engine tracks. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe the night had passed without incident. Then he saw the footprints. They cut across the edge of the clearing, half a dozen yards from the cabin, heavy boot prints pressed deep into the snow. Not hurried, not wandering. Whoever had made them had circled once, close enough to see the porch, the light, the door. Then the tracks angled back toward the tree line, following the slope down toward the frozen lake. Daniel's jaw tightened. He memorized the pattern without effort, the depth of the heel, the length of the stride, the slight outward turn of the left foot. Someone had been here after the storm ended. Someone had taken their time. He stepped back from the window and glanced toward the couch. Emily was still asleep, her face turned toward the backrest, one arm curved protectively around Miles. The baby's breathing was steadier now, slow and warm against her chest. Lily lay curled inside the sleeping bag near the stove, thumb pressed against her lips, cheeks flushed with heat. Ethan was awake. The boy lay on his side, eyes open, watching Daniel without blinking. Daniel held the gaze for a second, then nodded once. He didn't speak. Ethan didn't either. They shared an understanding without words. Something had changed. Daniel eased the door open and stepped outside, closing it carefully behind him. Cold snapped at his face instantly. The porch boards creaked under his weight. He crouched near the edge and studied the tracks more closely, careful not to disturb them. The impressions were fresh, edges sharp, untouched by drift. He followed them with his eyes until they disappeared among the pines. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was someone searching. He straightened and scanned the tree line, listening. Wind moved lightly through the branches, carrying no voices, no engines. Still, his muscles stayed coiled. Whatever had passed through here had done so quietly. That bothered him more than noise would have. Inside, the kettle whistled softly. Daniel went back in and shut the door. He latched it, then locked it this time. The sound was small but final. Ethan noticed. Someone was outside, the boy said quietly, not asking. Daniel poured water into 2 mugs and handed one to Ethan. Yes. Ethan's fingers tightened around the ceramic. Him? Daniel didn't answer right away. He watched the boy process the possibility, saw the calculation already forming behind his eyes. I don't know, he said finally, but I don't like the way they moved. Emily stirred then, lifting her head slightly. She took in the room in one glance, the locked door, Daniel standing, Ethan alert. Her shoulders stiffened. What is it? She asked. Daniel told her about the tracks, sparing detail but not truth. He described where they were, how recent. He did not speculate aloud, but he didn't need to. Emily's hand tightened around Miles instinctively. Her face lost what little color warmth had returned overnight. He followed us, she said. The words were flat, exhausted rather than surprised. I knew he would. Lily sat up, rubbing her eyes. Mom? She asked softly, sensing the shift. Emily forced her voice to stay steady. It's okay, sweetheart. We're just talking. Daniel watched the children closely. Fear traveled fast in small rooms. He moved to the stove, adjusted the fire, and then set about making breakfast. Oatmeal, apples sliced thin, the last of the honey stirred in. He worked deliberately, grounding the room with routine. No one's leaving right now, he said, not looking up. Road's still bad, and whoever made those tracks isn't here anymore. Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. Lily crawled closer to her mother. Miles whimpered once, then settled. After they ate, Daniel handed Emily his phone. There's spotty service, he said. Try now while it's quiet. Emily hesitated, then took it. Her fingers shook slightly as she dialed. It rang twice before going to voicemail. She ended the call and tried again, this time a different number, same result. She lowered the phone slowly. He smashed mine, she said, voice barely above a breath. Weeks ago, said I didn't need it. Daniel felt anger flare, sharp and hot, then flatten into something colder. He took the phone back and set it on the counter. There's a town deputy, he said, lives near the highway. If we can reach him? A sound cut him off. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The low rumble of an engine. Daniel went still. Ethan's head snapped toward the window. Emily froze mid-breath. The engine sound grew louder, then cut abruptly. Silence followed, heavier than before. Daniel crossed to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see. A truck sat at the edge of the road, partially obscured by snowbanks. Old, dark. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, thick through the shoulders, movements loose in the way of someone who believed the world yielded if pushed hard enough. He wore a worn leather jacket over a hoodie, jeans tucked into heavy boots. His beard was uneven, more neglect than style, streaked with gray that made his age hard to place, late 30s, early 40s. His hair was dark and uncombed, eyes hidden beneath the brim of a cap pulled low. Even from a distance, Daniel could see tension in the way the man carried himself, like coiled wire waiting for release. Emily sucked in a breath behind him. "That's him," she whispered. Daniel didn't move away from the window. He watched as the man surveyed the clearing, eyes catching on the porch light, the cabin door. The man's posture shifted subtly, confidence sharpening into something intent. Daniel turned, already planning. "You take the kids into the back room," he said quietly to Emily. "Lock it. Stay there." "What are you going to do?" Ethan asked. Daniel met the boy's gaze. "What I should have done a long time ago," he said, and placed his hand on the door latch. He did not grab a weapon. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. Cold hit him like a wall. The man looked up, surprised for half a second, then smiled, a slow, crooked grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," the man called out, his voice carried easily across the snow. "Didn't expect company." Daniel walked forward until he stood at the edge of the porch. He did not descend the steps. He kept higher ground. "You're on private property," Daniel said evenly. "Turn around." The man laughed once, short and humorless. "I'm just looking for my family." Daniel felt the weight of every choice he had made up to this point settle squarely on his shoulders. "They're not yours to look for," he replied. The man's smile vanished, his jaw flexed. He took one step forward, then stopped. "You don't know what you're getting into." Daniel held his ground. He had stood in worse places, faced louder threats. This man was not unpredictable. He was entitled, and that made him dangerous in a different way. "I know exactly," Daniel said. "You leave now, or this ends with you explaining yourself to the sheriff." For a moment, the only sound was wind brushing snow off the trees. The man's eyes flicked to the cabin door, then back to Daniel. Calculation passed over his face. "This isn't over," he said finally. Daniel didn't answer. He watched as the man turned, climbed back into the truck, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, tires spinning briefly before gripping the road. The truck disappeared back the way it had come, leaving behind churned snow and a silence that felt fragile rather than peaceful. Daniel stood there a long moment before going inside. Emily was waiting just beyond the door, Miles clutched tight, Lily pressed against her side, Ethan standing in front of them like a small shield. When Daniel closed the door behind him, the tension broke all at once. "He's gone," Daniel said. "For now." Emily's knees buckled slightly. She sank onto the chair, breathing hard. Ethan exhaled shakily. Lily buried her face in her mother's coat. Daniel leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of the tremor in his hands. He steadied them and looked at the family gathered in his cabin. One night, he thought again. But he knew, now more than ever, that the night had changed everything. The truck's engine noise had barely faded before the quiet returned, thicker than before, settling into the cabin like a held breath. Daniel Hargrove stayed where he was, his back against the wall, listening, not just to the wind or the stove, but to the subtle sounds of people recovering from fear. Emily's breathing came in short, controlled pulls as she rocked Miles. Lily clung to her mother without speaking. Ethan stood very still, eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting it to burst open again. Daniel did not rush to reassure them. False comfort had a way of collapsing later. Instead, he moved deliberately, checking the window latches, securing the back door, adjusting the lock with a final audible click. The cabin felt smaller now, not because of the people inside it, but because danger had crossed an invisible line. What had been a refuge had become a position. Emily was the first to break the silence. "He won't stop," she said quietly. There was no panic in her voice, only certainty shaped by experience. She shifted Miles higher against her shoulder, her hand steady despite the tremor that ran through her arm. Up close, Daniel could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, not age, but vigilance. "When he loses control, he doesn't back down, he waits." Daniel nodded once. He believed her. Ethan finally turned away from the door and looked at Daniel. Up close, the boy's face showed the strain he'd been holding back, jaw clenched too tight, eyes bright with unshed tears. He refused to let fall. "You scared him," Ethan said. "It wasn't praise, it was an observation." "For now," Daniel replied. He met the boy's gaze fully this time. "But that doesn't mean we wait for him to decide what comes next." Lily shifted, her small fingers curling into Emily's sleeve. "Is he coming back?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. Daniel answered instead. "Not today," he said calmly. "And not without consequences." The word seemed to land with weight. Consequences were something Daniel understood intimately. They were why he had chosen isolation, why he had kept his world contained and predictable, and why this moment felt like standing at the edge of a frozen lake, knowing the ice might not hold. He crossed to the counter and picked up his phone. This time, he didn't hesitate. He moved to the window, angled the device carefully, and waited. After a few seconds, a single bar flickered to life. Then, 2. He dialed. The call connected after 3 rings. A voice answered, gravelly but alert. "Sheriff's office." "This is Daniel Hargrove," Daniel said. "Ash River Road. I've got a domestic situation that just escalated. The man followed his family out here. He's already been warned off once." There was a pause, then a shift in tone. "You alone out there?" "No," Daniel replied. "Not anymore." The dispatcher asked for details: vehicle description, direction of travel, physical appearance. Daniel gave them precisely, his words clipped and exact. He described the man's posture, his gait, the way he had assessed the property. When he finished, there was another pause. "You did the right thing calling," the dispatcher said. "Deputy Cole is on his way. 20 minutes, weather permitting." Daniel thanked him and ended the call. He turned back to the room. Emily watched him closely. "They're coming?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "And when they arrive, we're going to do this properly." Ethan's shoulders sagged just slightly, the first sign of relief he'd allowed himself. Lily leaned her head against Emily's arm. Miles stirred, then settled again, his small fingers clutching the fabric of his mother's jacket. While they waited, Daniel set about creating order. He made more hot water, wrapped another blanket around Miles, and moved the table closer to the couch so Emily wouldn't have to shift. His movements were practical, but there was intention in them now, an acknowledgement that this was no longer a temporary interruption. It was a situation that required care. Time stretched. Outside, the light sharpened as the sun climbed, reflecting off the snow until the clearing glowed painfully bright. Daniel kept watch through the window, scanning the road, the tree line, the frozen lake beyond. His mind moved through contingencies he hoped he wouldn't need. The sound of tires crunching on packed snow finally broke the tension. A marked sheriff's SUV pulled into the clearing and came to a stop near the porch. A man stepped out, tall and solid, movements measured. He wore a heavy-duty winter uniform and a knit cap pulled low. His beard was trimmed close, salt and pepper, and his eyes were sharp in a way that suggested patience rather than aggression. He approached the porch slowly, hands visible. Daniel opened the door before he knocked. "Daniel Hargrove?" the man asked. "Yes?" "I'm Deputy Aaron Cole," he said, offering a brief nod. "Mind if I come in?" Daniel stepped aside. The deputy entered, boots heavy on the floor, and took in the scene with a practiced glance. He didn't stare, didn't rush. His attention moved from Emily to the children, then back to Daniel. Emily stood as he approached, adjusting Miles automatically. Deputy Cole stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm here to help." Something in his tone, steady, unhurried, seemed to loosen something in Emily. Her shoulders slumped, just a fraction. "He followed us," she said. "He's done it before." Deputy Cole nodded. "I understand. We'll take this step by step." He asked questions calmly, documenting what had happened, when, and where. He examined the bruise along Emily's jaw without touching her, his expression tightening briefly before smoothing again. He spoke to Ethan and Lily as well, keeping his voice low, explaining what he was doing and why. Ethan answered carefully, his words precise. Lily nodded when asked simple questions, eyes never leaving her mother. When the deputy finished, he straightened and addressed Daniel. "You did exactly what you should have," he said. "Calling us early matters." "What happens now?" Emily asked. "We'll file a report," Deputy Cole said. "I'll put out a bolo on his vehicle, and I can get you connected with a shelter in town, somewhere secure." Emily's mouth tightened. "I don't want to disappear again." Deputy Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we'll look at protective orders, legal options. You don't have to decide everything today." After he left to radio in his report, the cabin felt different, still tense, but anchored now by something solid. Accountability had entered the room. Daniel watched Emily as she sat back down, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. She looked smaller now, not weaker, but human again. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting Daniel's eyes. This time, the gratitude didn't hurt. It settled. Daniel nodded. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan looked between them, then spoke. "Does this mean we're safe?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "It means you're not alone," he said, "and that makes a difference." Outside, Deputy Cole's radio crackled softly. Snow shifted in the trees. The cabin held steady. Daniel realized something then, something subtle but undeniable. The lines he had drawn around his life, the ones meant to protect him, had already been crossed, and instead of chaos, what he felt was clarity. Some lines, once crossed, could not be unseen. When Deputy Cole's SUV finally disappeared down Ash River Road, it left behind something more unsettling than danger, quiet with memory. The sound of the engine faded, but its echo seemed to linger in the walls, as if the cabin itself were deciding what it now stood for. Daniel Hargrove watched the road until it emptied completely, then turned back inside and closed the door. He did not lock it this time. He latched it, rested his palm against the wood, and stood there a moment longer than necessary. Emily was seated on the couch, Miles asleep against her chest, his small breaths rising and falling with fragile consistency. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, lining up pieces of kindling with serious concentration, arranging them into careful rows as if order could be built one stick at a time. Ethan stood by the window, scanning the clearing out of habit rather than need. The boy's shoulders had dropped since the deputy arrived, but not fully. Relief, Daniel knew, was something that came in stages. Daniel crossed the room and set a kettle back on the stove. The simple act felt grounding. Water, heat, time. He poured tea into 2 mugs and handed one to Emily, keeping his voice low. "You should drink, even if you don't want to." Emily accepted it with both hands. Her fingers were still cold, but steadier now. "I don't know how to say thank you without it sounding small," she said. "You don't have to say it at all," Daniel replied. He took the chair across from her, not too close. "We'll figure the rest out." The word rest seemed to carry weight. It meant decisions, shelters, legal steps, schools, work. It meant uncertainty of a different kind. Emily nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her mug. "I don't want them moving again," she said quietly. "Every time we start to feel normal, something happens." Daniel looked at the children, at the careful way Lily kept her eyes on her mother even while playing, at the way Ethan listened with his whole body. "Stability matters," he said, "more than people think." Outside, a gust rattled the window. The stove crackled in response as if answering. Daniel stood and added a log, then crouched to check the draft. When he rose, he felt it, the pull to keep going, to do more, to fix what could not be fixed in a day. It was a familiar pull, one he had learned to resist by stepping away from everything else, but stepping away was no longer an option. Emily shifted Miles gently and stood, testing her balance. "I can help," she said, reading his hesitation, "with chores, cooking, anything. I don't want to be a burden." Daniel shook his head. "You're not," he said, and meant it. "But you don't need to earn space, not here." Ethan turned from the window. "What happens if he comes back?" The question was direct, unadorned. Daniel met his gaze. "Then he won't be dealing with me alone," he said, "and he won't be dealing with silence." The boy absorbed this, nodded once, and returned to his watch. Lily looked up briefly, then returned to her careful lines of wood. Emily's shoulders eased a fraction. Later, when the light outside softened and the snow began to take on a faint blue hue, Daniel stepped out to the shed to check supplies. He worked quickly, mindful of the cold. The shed door groaned open, releasing the smell of old wood and oil. Inside, tools hung where he'd left them. He took inventory without writing anything down. Food for a week, maybe 2 if stretched. Extra blankets, fuel enough to keep the stove fed. He frowned, then grabbed an additional sack of oats and a box of canned vegetables. The cabin could hold more than one life. He had designed it that way, even if he hadn't admitted why. As he returned, he noticed fresh movement at the edge of the clearing. Not tracks, but a figure approaching on foot. Daniel's muscles tightened. He set the supplies down just inside the door and stepped back out, posture alert but non-threatening. The man raised a hand from a distance. "Easy," he called. "I'm not lost." He was older than Daniel by a decade, perhaps more, with a lean build and a weathered face marked by sun and cold. His beard was gray and trimmed short, his eyes sharp but kind. He wore a heavy canvas coat and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had lived in this terrain long enough to respect it. "I'm Henry Walsh," the man said as he drew closer. "I own the place down the ridge. Deputy Cole radioed me, said you might have company." Daniel studied him. The man's stance was open, his hands visible. No hurry, no tension. "Daniel," he said, "you should have called before coming up." Henry smiled faintly. "In weather like this, radio beats phone. I brought stew." He lifted a battered thermos. "Figured you could use it." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He stepped aside, letting Henry approach the porch. Inside, Emily rose when she saw them, instinctively protective. Henry stopped just inside the doorway, removing his hat. "I won't stay long," Henry said gently, eyes flicking to the children. "Just wanted to check in." Emily studied him, then nodded. There was something about Henry's presence, unassuming, steady, that lowered the temperature in the room. He poured stew into a bowl and set it on the table, then glanced at Daniel. "You're doing right by them," he said quietly. "That matters around here." Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He stayed just long enough to confirm what he needed to see. Children fed, heat steady, fear contained. When he left, the cabin felt less isolated, as if an invisible boundary had shifted outward. That evening, Daniel cooked properly for the first time since the storm began. He showed Lily how to stir without splashing, let Ethan help chop vegetables under close supervision. The boy handled the knife with careful seriousness, eyes focused, jaw set. Emily watched from the couch, Miles asleep against her, a faint smile touching her mouth for the first time. After dinner, the children settled into quiet routines. Lily drew pictures with a stubby pencil Daniel hadn't realized he still owned. Ethan cleaned the table without being asked, methodical and precise. Emily washed dishes, her movements efficient, practiced. The cabin hummed with ordinary sounds, water, paper, breath. Later, when the fire burned low and the children slept, Emily sat across from Daniel at the table. "I'm scared," she said, not dramatically, honestly. Daniel nodded. "So am I," he replied. The admission surprised him. It also felt right. "But this," Emily continued, gesturing around the room, "this feels like a beginning, not an escape." Daniel looked at the door, the window, the light beyond the glass. He had built his life to avoid beginnings. He had thought endings were easier to manage. Now he wasn't so sure. Outside, snow fell lightly again, not as a threat, but as punctuation. Inside, the cabin held steady, warmed by shared breath and quiet resolve. What stayed after the sirens, Daniel realized, was choice. And tonight, for the first time in years, he did not feel the need to walk away from it. Morning came with a different quality of light, not warmer, not softer, just steadier. The sky over Ash River was a pale, uninterrupted gray, and the snow reflected it back with a quiet confidence, as if the land had decided it would endure whatever came next. Daniel Hargrove stood at the window with a mug cooling in his hands and noticed with mild surprise that he had slept through the night. Not deeply, not without waking, but enough. Behind him, the cabin breathed with the small sounds of life settling into rhythm. Lily hummed softly as she colored at the table, legs swinging beneath the chair. Ethan was outside, visible through the window, helping Henry Walsh stack firewood with careful precision, his movements deliberate, almost adult. Emily sat on the couch with Miles balanced against her shoulder, patting his back in slow, practiced motions. The baby gurgled once, a small sound that carried farther than it should have in the quiet room. Daniel turned away from the window. He felt the urge to catalog tasks, to assign purpose to every hour. That instinct had kept him alive for years, but it had also kept him alone. Henry's voice drifted in from outside, low and conversational. Daniel couldn't hear the words, only the tone, easy, grounded. He watched Ethan respond, nodding, lifting logs with effort but not complaint. The boy listened the way people did when they wanted to learn rather than impress. Emily caught Daniel's glance and offered a small smile. It was tentative, still testing whether calm was allowed. Henry said the roads might open by tomorrow afternoon, she said. If the plows get through, Daniel nodded. They will. And then? She asked. Not as a challenge, as a question that had been waiting for air. Daniel considered the answer carefully. Then we decide, he said, with information, not fear. Emily exhaled, slow and relieved. She adjusted Miles, who had begun to drift toward sleep again. The bruise along her jaw had faded slightly, yellowing at the edges. Healing left marks too, Daniel thought. Just quieter ones. A knock sounded at the door. Emily stiffened instantly. Lily froze, pencil mid-air. Daniel was already moving, calm but alert. He reached the door and opened it to reveal a woman standing on the porch, boots dusted with snow, hat pulled low. She was in her late 40s, perhaps early 50s, average height, sturdy build. Her coat was practical, her scarf neatly tucked. Wisps of dark hair escaped beneath her knit cap streaked with silver. Her face held the open lines of someone accustomed to listening, eyes warm but assessing. Morning, she said. I'm Ruth Calder. I run the outreach office in town. Daniel studied her briefly. Deputy Cole send you? Ruth nodded. He did. Said there's a family here that could use options. Daniel stepped aside and let her in. Ruth removed her hat and gloves, scanning the room with gentle efficiency. She took in the children first, then Emily, then Daniel. I won't stay long, she said. Just wanted to introduce myself and explain what support looks like. No pressure. Emily stood, still holding Miles. Ruth stopped a respectful distance away. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, Ruth said. I'm here to make sure you know what's available. Shelter, legal aid, medical checkups, and choices. The word landed softly, but firmly. They sat at the table while Lily moved closer to Emily, leaning against her knee. Ethan returned from outside, cheeks flushed from the cold, and took a seat without being asked. Ruth spoke calmly, outlining steps without overwhelming detail. She explained how protective orders worked, what temporary housing could look like, how schools handled transitions. She did not promise ease. She promised process. Emily listened intently, asking questions when she needed clarification. Her voice was steady now, the tremor replaced by focus. Daniel noticed the shift. Fear had narrowed her world before. Information widened it again. I don't want them hiding, Emily said finally. I want them safe, but not erased, Ruth nodded. That's a reasonable thing to want. When Ruth left, the cabin felt fuller, not because of more people, but because of possibility. Daniel walked her to the door and watched as she made her way back down the road, careful with her footing. He stood there a moment after she disappeared, the cold biting lightly at his face. Henry approached from the woodpile. She good people, he said, doesn't rush things. Daniel nodded. I noticed. Henry hesitated, then spoke again. Town's changing, slow, but it is. Folks looking out for each other more than they used to. Daniel looked back toward the cabin. Sometimes it takes a reason. Henry smiled faintly. Sometimes it takes someone not walking away. Inside, Emily had laid Miles down for a nap and joined Lily at the table. The little girl was drawing a picture of the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney in exaggerated curls. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, offering quiet commentary. It was an ordinary moment, but it struck Daniel with unexpected force. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove Henry back down the ridge. The road was still rough, but passable. When he returned, the cabin greeted him with warmth and noise. Lily ran to the door, stopping short as if unsure she was allowed to be that eager. You're back, she said, relief unguarded. I said I would be, Daniel replied. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her drawing. As evening settled in, Emily cooked dinner using ingredients Daniel hadn't touched in months. The smell filled the cabin, rich and grounding. Ethan set the table. Lily insisted on lighting the lamp herself. Miles woke long enough to be fed, then slept again, his small chest rising and falling with new confidence. After dinner, Emily and Daniel sat together at the table while the children played quietly nearby. The conversation came easily now, drifting from practical matters to quieter ones. Emily spoke about the early days of her marriage, the slow tightening of control, the moment she realized staying was more dangerous than leaving. Daniel spoke less, but when he did, his words carried weight, brief mentions of service, of learning how to leave before things mattered too much. "You don't have to keep doing that," Emily said gently. "Leaving." Daniel considered it. "I don't know any other way." Emily met his gaze. "You're learning one." The night deepened. Outside, the wind softened, as if the land itself were resting. Daniel stood by the window again, looking out at the road that no longer felt like an edge, but a connection. He realized then that tomorrow had already taken shape, not as a guarantee, not as a promise, but as something real enough to step toward. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel did not brace himself against it. Snow fell again overnight, but lightly this time, more dust than burden. It softened edges without erasing them. Daniel Hargrove noticed the difference as soon as he stepped onto the porch at dawn. The world felt quieter, not because danger had vanished, but because it had been named. In places like Ash River, naming things mattered. He stood there a moment, breath fogging the air, listening to the far-off creak of trees and the distant hiss of the lake ice adjusting to temperature. The porch light was still on. He reached up, hesitated, then left it burning. Habit, yes, but also intention. Inside, the cabin stirred awake in layers. Emily moved first, easing herself up from the couch without waking Miles, whose sleep had grown heavier, less fitful. She carried him carefully to the small bedroom Daniel rarely used and laid him down, adjusting the blanket with a tenderness that looked practiced but no longer frantic. Lily followed, dragging her drawing pad, eyes bright with morning curiosity. Ethan lingered near the table, glancing out the window before sitting, still watchful, but less rigid than before. Daniel brewed coffee and set water to heat for oatmeal. He didn't announce breakfast. He let the smells do the work. When Emily returned to the kitchen, she paused, watching him, then smiled faintly. "You're quieter today," she said. Daniel considered it. "So are you." She nodded, accepting the observation without defensiveness. "I slept," she said, surprised by it. "Really slept." "That's a start," Daniel replied. Later that morning, Deputy Cole called to check in. The man's voice came through clear this time, steady reception, good weather. He confirmed the report had been filed, the vehicle flagged. "He hasn't shown up in town," Cole said, "and if he does, we'll know." After the call ended, Daniel leaned against the counter, thinking. The cabin had been built for endurance, not permanence. He had told himself that for years, yet endurance, he was learning, could quietly become something else. A knock came at mid-morning, not sharp, not urgent. Daniel opened the door to find Henry Walsh standing with a younger man beside him. The newcomer was tall and lean, early 30s, with a trimmed beard and clear, attentive eyes. He wore a heavy jacket with a county insignia stitched at the shoulder. "This is Mark Rivera," Henry said. "Animal control and search and rescue. He's helping the county cover the back roads while things settle." Mark offered a nod. "Heard there were kids up here," he said simply. "Wanted to make sure everything's covered." Daniel stepped aside. Mark entered, taking in the room with a quick, respectful scan. He didn't linger on Emily or the children. He let them exist without scrutiny. That alone eased the air. "I've got a dog in the truck," Mark said to Daniel. K9. Her name's Juniper, 6 years old, trained, calm. Sometimes helps kids relax after rough nights, only if that's okay. Emily looked at Daniel, then at Lily, who had already leaned forward, interest unguarded. Ethan straightened slightly, curiosity overtaking caution. Daniel nodded. "Bring her." Juniper entered with Mark, a medium-sized German shepherd mix with a sable coat and intelligent, gentle eyes. She moved with controlled confidence, tail low, ears alert but relaxed. She sat when Mark stopped. waiting for instruction. Lily approached first, slow but eager. "Can I?" she asked. Mark crouched. "Let her sniff your hand." Juniper leaned forward, sniffed once, then nudged Lily's fingers with her nose. Lily laughed, a soft, surprised sound that seemed to loosen the room. Ethan followed, kneeling, hand steady. Juniper accepted him too, then glanced up at Emily, who watched with careful interest. When Juniper approached her, Emily stiffened for a fraction of a second, then relaxed as the dog rested her head gently against Emily's knee. Miles slept through it all, breathing even. Mark smiled. "She knows," he said quietly. "Some animals do." They didn't stay long. Mark left Juniper's contact info and offered to return if needed. When he and Henry departed, the cabin felt brighter, as if something unseen had been affirmed. That afternoon, Daniel drove Emily and the kids into town. The road had been cleared enough to pass. It was the first time they'd left the cabin together. Emily sat in the passenger seat, Miles secured carefully, hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan watched the passing trees. Lily pressed her face to the window, marveling at plows and storefronts. They stopped at the outreach office where Ruth Calder met them again. Paperwork followed. Careful, methodical. Emily signed forms with a steadier hand than before. The children were given snacks and crayons. No one rushed them. When they returned to the cabin near dusk, Emily seemed lighter, though the weight of decision still hovered. "They have a place for us," she said quietly as Daniel parked. "Temporary. Safe." Daniel nodded. "That's good. But," she hesitated, "they said it's my choice when to go." He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't asking permission. She was asking honesty. "You don't owe me staying," Daniel said. "I know," Emily replied. "I just don't want to run anymore." Daniel felt something settle in his chest, not fear, responsibility. Chosen, not imposed. That night after the children slept, Emily sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug. "If we stay a few more days," she said, "it would help, just until the roads are fully open, until I can think clearly." Daniel met her gaze. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need." Outside, Juniper's paw prints from earlier were already fading beneath fresh snow. Inside, the cabin held steady. Daniel lay awake later, listening to the house breathe. He realized then that staying, really staying, was no longer an accident. It was a choice he was making again and again, and this time, he did not feel trapped by it. Spring did not arrive in Ash River all at once. It came in signs so small they could be missed by anyone not paying attention. The drip of meltwater along the porch edge, the way the lake ice softened from blue-white to gray, the return of birds that tested the air with cautious calls. Daniel Hargrove noticed every change. He had learned over the years to read what endured by watching how it shifted. The cabin had shifted too. Mornings began earlier now, not from habit, but from life-stirring. Miles woke first most days, announcing himself with soft, insistent sounds that Emily answered without hesitation. Lily followed, padding across the floor to the table where she colored pictures of trees with green tips and chimneys with smoke shaped like hearts. Ethan took on quiet responsibilities without being asked, splitting kindling with measured care, checking the latch before dusk, walking the short path to the mailbox once the road reopened. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Daniel remained himself, reserved, precise, but the edges had softened. He brewed coffee for more than one cup. He stocked the pantry beyond bare necessity. He found himself repairing a loose step on the porch he'd ignored for years because it had been good enough. Good enough no longer felt sufficient. The legal process moved forward steadily. Deputy Cole checked in twice more, confirming that the protective order had been approved and served. The truck hadn't been seen again near Ash River Road. There were hearings ahead, paperwork yet to come, but the direction was clear. Emily carried herself differently now, her spine straighter, her gaze forward rather than constantly scanning. Fear still visited, but it no longer dictated every decision. One afternoon, Ruth Calder returned with a folder tucked beneath her arm and a smile that meant progress. "The temporary housing is ready whenever you are," she told Emily, "and the school district can place Lily and Ethan without delay." Emily listened, then looked around the cabin. the table scarred with age, the stove blackened by years of use, the window where light pooled in the late afternoon. She nodded slowly. "Soon," she said, "not today." Ruth didn't press. She understood timing as well as process. Henry Walsh stopped by less frequently now, content that the situation had steadied. Mark Rivera came once more with Juniper, who had become a quiet favorite. Lily braided Juniper's fur with careful fingers. Ethan asked Mark questions about search and rescue, listening with the kind of focus that suggested a future beginning to take shape. As winter finally loosened its grip, Daniel stood one evening on the porch, watching the sun sink lower than it had all season. The porch light flicked on automatically. He reached up, intending to switch it off, then stopped. Emily joined him, Miles balanced on her hip, Lily leaning against her leg. Ethan stood a few steps back, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. "We should go tomorrow," Emily said gently, not with regret, with resolve. "The kids are ready. I think I am too." Daniel nodded. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared for it without admitting as much. "I'll help you load," he said. The night passed quietly. Morning arrived clear and bright, the kind that made distance look possible. They loaded the car together, clothes folded neatly, drawings stacked carefully, a box of supplies Daniel insisted they take. Ethan worked beside him without ceremony. Lily climbed into the back seat, pressing her face to the glass. Miles slept through the movement, thumb curled beneath his chin. When everything was ready, Emily paused by the porch steps. She set Miles down in his carrier and turned to Daniel, searching his face for words. "I didn't plan this," she said, "any of it, but I won't forget what you gave us, not just a place, a chance to stop running." Daniel held her gaze. "You did the hardest part," he said. "You chose to leave." She nodded, then surprised him by stepping forward and embracing him briefly, firmly. There was no awkwardness in it, only gratitude and respect. Ethan came next. He extended his hand, then hesitated and pulled Daniel into a quick, solid hug. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. Lily hugged Daniel's leg and laughed when he pretended surprise. "You keep the light on," she said seriously. "It helps people." Daniel swallowed, then nodded. I will." The car rolled down the road, tires humming against the thawing surface. Daniel watched until it disappeared beyond the bend. The clearing felt larger without them, quieter too. He stood there a long time, listening. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the cabin and did something he had never done before. He moved the chair closer to the window. He placed one of Lily's drawings on the wall near the stove. He restocked the shelf by the door with extra blankets and a thermos. When evening came, he turned on the porch light and left it on. Weeks passed. Emily called from town. The kids were settling in. Lily liked her teacher. Ethan had joined a woodworking club. Miles was walking, unsteady but determined. Emily's voice carried relief and pride in equal measure. "We're okay," she said, "really okay." Daniel smiled after the call ended and sat with the feeling rather than stepping away from it. One evening near the end of April, Daniel heard a familiar engine and stepped outside. Emily's car pulled into the clearing, followed by Henry's truck. Laughter drifted through the air. The kids spilled out, energy uncontained. They had come for dinner. The cabin filled again, with voices, movement, warmth. Juniper lay by the stove, content. Henry told stories. Mark stopped by briefly, bringing news of trails reopening. The table held food enough for everyone. When night fell, the porch light glowed steady against the dark. Later, when the guests departed and the quiet returned, Daniel stood alone on the porch. He looked at the light, then out toward the road, and finally up at the sky where stars pierced the thinning night. He understood then what the winter had taught him. Survival was not the absence of need, it was the courage to answer it. Miracles did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they came quietly, in the shape of a knock, a choice, a door opened and not closed again. Daniel left the porch light on and went inside, carrying with him the steady certainty that the light would mean something to someone someday. And that was enough. Sometimes, miracles do not come with thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, through a door left unlocked, through a light left on when it would have been easier to turn it off. God often works not through strength, but through willingness, not through perfection, but through compassion. A heart that chooses to stay when walking away feels safer. In our daily lives, we are given the same choice: to close ourselves off from pain or to open our doors to love, to believe the world is too broken to change, or to trust that even small kindness can begin healing. This story reminds us that no one is forgotten by God, not the broken, not the afraid, not those starting over with nothing but hope. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need light today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe in stories of faith, love, and quiet miracles, subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing hope together. May God bless you and your family. May He protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide your steps, even in the coldest seasons of life. And may you always remember, sometimes the miracle begins when you choose to keep the light on.